Hey everybody, welcome to CrazyTechLab, and this video is all about what is in this box here. We have the brand new NVIDIA GeForce RTX 4080 Super Founders Edition to look at today. It is in this box. We're going to be opening it in just a moment. Hot off the heels, obviously, over the RTX 4070 Ti Super and the 4070 Super, which were both launched earlier this month. So it's the high-end card that launches last this time around with the RTX 40 Super series. Now the 4080, probably the best thing about it is that it is meant to have an MSRP or retail price of around $999, which is $200 less than the RTX 4080 launched at, that card launching at $1,200 or thereabouts. Obviously, when they land on shop shelves and you're talking about partner cards and all that kind of stuff, they do seem to be retailing a fair bit higher than that. But $200 less is still $200 less. I'm hopeful that this card will usher in a slightly lower price point for an RTX 4080 or 4080 Super. Now, the 4080 Super is replacing the 4080 in market, just as the 4070 Ti Super did as well. The 4070 Super, though, is sticking around alongside the original 4070. So the mid-range and high-end super cards that we've got here replacing their predecessors in the market. That might mean that we see price cuts, or it might mean that the previous models are going to sit roughly where they are for the time being until stocks have cleared, which means that the new super cards might end up being a little bit more expensive for the time being until those older cards have cleared from shelves. So what are we looking at in terms of the Founders Edition, and what are we looking at in terms of specifications? Well, I know that you guys probably came here to see the Founders Edition, so let's take a look at it. And as we can see with the 4070 Super that we've got over here, the other Founders Edition card, just a baby version of it basically. NVIDIA has gone all black with these designs. We now have a card that is identical to the 4080 in dimensions and design, but it now has a black design. So I kind of like it, but I still do prefer the gunmetal versions of the previous Founders Edition cards. I think when we looked at the first Super Edition cards with the RTX 20 series, and they got all that kind of chrome reflected panels and green lettering and all that kind of stuff, I thought they looked so much better than the original RTX versions. With these ones, I think it's maybe the other way around, but maybe to a lesser extent. I still think that this looks absolutely sick, and I love how this will look in a black case with a black theme as well. You know, as an all-black design, I don't think there are many other graphics cards that will look as good as this one, or certainly not 4080 Supers. So that is it. That is what we have. So in terms of the specifications, we will bring up my table now so we can look at the numbers. So we've got more cores across the board. We've got more CUDA cores, more Tensor cores, more RT cores. We've got more ROPs as well. And we also have the fastest memory out there on an NVIDIA card right now at 23 gigabits per second. So a slight memory increase, lots more cores, but not quite as many core increases as we saw with the previous two models, the 4070 Ti Super and 4070 Super, gaining more cores in percentage terms than the 4080 Super does over its predecessor. So no memory upgrade here in terms of memory interface or memory amount. We're still dealing with 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 and a 256-bit memory bus as well. So it's all about cores and everything else to make this card faster than its predecessor. But you know, we got a memory upgrade and a memory interface upgrade with the 4070 Ti Super, and it didn't end up being that much faster really. So hopefully today we might see some much higher frame rates in our games, and hopefully meaning that the combined with the $200 cheaper price tag, that the 4080 Super might actually be the best card of this bunch that NVIDIA has launched this month. So without further ado, let's crack on with the benchmarks. But before that, could you please subscribe to my channel? It means a lot to have your support and just gets me noticed. And also don't forget to like and comment on this video as well. Love hearing what you guys think of my video and the products. Today, we're obviously looking at the 4080 Super. Are you planning on using one of NVIDIA's new 40 series super cards in your rig, or are you sticking with another brand? So always interested in hearing what you guys come up with in the comments, and adding a comment and liking this video just helps punch me up the algorithm and gets me more traffic as well, which is obviously very, very important. So don't forget to do all three of those things: like, comment and subscribe. And without further ado, let's crack on with the benchmarks. My test system includes an Intel Core i9-12900K processor running at stock speed and is water-cooled. We've also got 32GB of Kingston Fury DDR5 6000 memory, and we have an Asus Maximus Z790 Hero motherboard. My test system uses the latest Windows drivers and updates as of January 2024, and we've also got the latest NVIDIA driver for the RTX 4080 today, and we've retested the NVIDIA cards in the graphs using that driver as well. So we have both ray traced and standard rasterization results, and I've also focused on resolutions above 1080p because I don't think testing at 1080p is a realistic scenario for a $1,000 graphics card. Starting with Far Cry 6 then, and at 1440p we've got a small uplift in the lead that it has over the RTX 4080 by 6 frames per second on the minimum frame rate, rising from 122 to 128, which was also enough to leapfrog the RX 7900 XT in this game, and also the RTX 4080 Super outpacing the 7900 XTX on the average frame rate. However, the RTX 4090 is still king and out a long way in front. Stepping up to 4K, and again we have a decent uplift in the minimum 99th percentile over the RTX 4080, but the RX 7900 XT does manage a slightly faster minimum 99th percentile in this situation, even if it is behind on the average frame rate. However, here both the RTX 4090 and the RX 7900 XTX were significantly ahead. Enabling DXR or ray tracing in Far Cry 6 sees the top end squeezed a little bit, with the RTX 4080 Super not sitting that far behind the RTX 4090 and 7900 XTX, and it was also faster than the RX 7900 XT. Moving on to Forza Horizon 5, and we don't really see much of an uplift over the RTX 4080 with the RTX 4080 Super, and also the RX 7900 XT and 7900 XTX were actually faster in this game, which generally does prefer AMD graphics cards. Stepping up to 4K, and we see a larger gap here between the RTX 4080 and 4080 Super, and it's also enough for the 4080 Super to close the gap on the RX 7900 XT. However, the RX 7900 XTX and RTX 4090 are still a long way ahead. In the final graph, we've got every NVIDIA graphics card with DLSS enabled, and we also have FSR enabled for AMD cards. And here, the RTX 4080 Super finally beats the RX 7900 XTX, which has FSR enabled, of course. And again, though, the RTX 4090 is a long way out in front, and the RTX 4080 isn't that far behind. Next up is Halo Infinite, and here Nvidia seems to perform pretty well. We've seen that since the game was released, and the RTX 4080 Super managing some super high frame rates at 1440p, and it was also noticeably quicker than the RX 7900 XTX as well. So here though, the RTX 4090 doesn't hold quite as much of a lead as we've seen in the past, but here things are probably getting bottlenecked elsewhere in the system. Even so, it was enough to hold a decent lead over the RTX 4080 as well. Stepping up to 4K sees the RTX 4090 and its extra memory stepping well ahead of the RTX 4080 Super, which does edge out a small lead over the RTX 4080, but the RX 7900 XTX does close the gap a fair bit, coming just behind the RTX 4080. Our next game is Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition, and starting on the left with the 1440p tests, and we have the RTX 4080 Super sitting a fair amount ahead of the RX 7900 XTX on the average frame rate, but the AMD card was only 1 frame behind on the minimum 99th percentile. The RTX 4080 Super also not really offering much of a lead over the RTX 4080. Stepping up to 4K sees the graph jiggle around a little bit, and the RTX 4090 extends its lead out over the RTX 4080 Super, which again didn't really offer much benefit over the RTX 4080. However, it was significantly quicker than the RTX 7900 XTX. Finally, we enable DLSS, and of course AMD's FSR isn't enabled in this game, and the RTX 4080 Super again sitting a fair way behind the RTX 4090 and not really offering much of a benefit over the RTX 4080. The RX 7900 XTX sitting well down below it in the graphs, again because FSR isn't possible in this game. Moving on to Flight Simulator then, and at 1440p, the usual scenario of very little performance difference between the graphics cards because we've just got other bottlenecks in the system. So we'll move on to 4K, and here we see the higher end graphics cards starting to stretch their legs and offering decent amount of extra performance over the lower tier graphics cards on test. And here though, the RTX 4080 not really that much slower than the 4080 Super, and the RTX 4090 not really offering that much of a benefit over the 4080 Super either. So again here, there are just bottlenecks elsewhere in the system. The final test includes FSR and DLSS 3.0 with frame generation, so this is one of the best ways, if not the best way, to get much higher frame rates in Flight Simulator because it avoids all of those bottlenecks by simply generating frames. So DLSS 3.0, obviously a fantastic way to get really high frame rates in Flight Simulator, and the RTX 4080 Super not really that much far behind the RTX 4090, but again not really offering that much more performance than the RTX 4080. However, it does convincingly beat the RX 7900 XTX with FSR enabled. Next up is Rainbow Six Extraction, and at 1440p we've got some seriously high frame rates here, so that's why we're seeing a slight compressing of results in the upper half of the graph because we've probably got some CPU bottlenecking going on or thereabouts. And the RTX 4080 Super not really offering that much more of a benefit over the RTX 4080, but it does closely match the RX 7900 XTX, so it's a tight battle between those two cards here. The RTX 4090 though, despite some bottlenecking going on elsewhere in the system, does still offer a decent lead over both of those cards. Stepping up to 4K, and we see the RTX 4090 stretching its legs with those bottlenecks removed and with more of an emphasis on GPU power. And here we see the RTX 4080 Super offering a slight advantage over the RTX 4080, especially on the average frame rate, and also outpacing the RX 7900 XTX. Rainbow Six Extraction is another game that supports DLSS, but unfortunately FSR isn't enabled, so we've got a bit of an advantage for NVIDIA in this game. We've got the RTX 4080 Super offering a small lead over the RTX 4080, and the RTX 4090 again stretching its legs out with a reasonable lead, but not quite as big as we've seen before. Moving on to our final game test then, and it is Watch Dogs Legion, and at 1440p we've got the RTX 4070 Super sitting pretty close to the RTX 4080, so nothing really new there, but the RTX 4090 not really offering that much more of a benefit either. Stepping up to 4K, and more load put onto the GPU, and we start to see the RTX 4080 stretching its legs and edging out more of a lead over the RTX 4080 here. And bearing in mind these are relatively low frame rates, we've got around a 5% uptick in performance on the minimum 99th percentile. The RTX 4090 though stretching its legs even further with a much larger lead over the 4080 Super. Finally then, at 4K again, but just with DLSS enabled, and again no FSR support in Watch Dogs Legion, so NVIDIA with the advantage again. We've got the RTX 4090 with a fairly decent lead over the RTX 4080 Super, again which has a very small lead in single frames over the RTX 4080. Finally then, we have system power consumption, and we have the RTX 4080 Super sitting around 5 GPUs up from the bottom, and only really around 10 watts more under load in games than the RTX 4080. So the lack of extra memory and anything really significant in terms of an upgrade just means that the extra cores are accounting for around 10 watts in our stress test. So what do we make of the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 4080 Super then? Well, I think the real headline here today is, of course, the price. $200 cheaper than the original RTX 4080. So the fact that the original card cost 20% more at launch is a good thing for consumers. It's still not £600, but it is a heck of a lot cheaper than the original card cost at launch, and we are getting a performance uplift. Now, ironically, this card is probably the one I was least looking forward to, or at least excited about at launch, because the 4080 Ti Super obviously had the memory upgrade, the memory interface upgrade, it had a larger L2 cache, plus more cores. So that card was potentially a little bit of a disappointment. Just the fact that we didn't see a huge uplift in performance, even though it was costing the same price, which again is a good thing. It shouldn't cost that much more, if at all. The 4070 Super, which is this card's baby brother, Basically, again, like the 4070 Ti Super, retailing for the same launch price, not a great deal extra performance. So neither of those two cards getting a price cut, but we are getting a big price cut with the 4080 Super. Now, in terms of performance, I wasn't really expecting that much more performance with the 4080 Super, for the simple reason that we're not really getting that many cores, RT cores, Tensor cores, CUDA cores, that kind of thing. We're only getting a small bump in memory performance, and it is the highest out of any RTX 40 series card, but it's still not a massive amount faster than the original card. We don't get a memory upgrade, of course, and we don't get a memory interface upgrade. So I was never expecting massive things from the 4080 Super, and that's pretty much what we've seen in the graphs. It is consistently faster than the 4080 Super, of course, but it is not really closing the gap that much between it and the 4090, which is maybe what we were led to believe in some of the rumors. So this is a much better value proposition than the 4080 was at launch, because of the price drop and because it has a lot more performance. Well, a reasonable amount more performance than the 4080 did as well. So for me, this card is going to be a toss-up between it and the 7900 XTX from AMD. Now, AMD is continuing on a very different path to NVIDIA. It is not releasing new cards, at least not in the very near future. So it is not releasing refreshed models like NVIDIA is. Basically, it is focusing on price cuts, and we've seen some fairly substantial price cuts for all of its 7000 series Radeon GPUs, the 7800 XT, the 7900 XT, and the 7900 XTX. So it's well worth looking at the 7900 XTX and the 7900 XT to see where the pricing is going to end up, because this card versus those cards is very much going to be on a game by game basis. And you will want to check the current pricing wherever you are in the world as to which one is worth buying for. Obviously, NVIDIA has the advantage of DLSS 3 and frame generation, all those kind of things. So games like Forza Horizon 5 making use of that now, and obviously it's a huge boon in Microsoft Flight Simulator. So again, it's going to come down to a game by game basis and whether you think it's worth it or not. For me, what was probably the least exciting card out of the three has turned out to be probably the most exciting one, but that all rests on getting this card at the promised launch price of around $1,000. Now, we're probably going to have to wait for existing stocks of 4080s to be cleared, and then for this card to sit on shelves for a couple of weeks before we actually see what the real retail pricing will actually be like. Launch pricing can always be a bit hit or miss, but hopefully we will see some cards retailing for around $1,000, and that is a pretty good deal for this graphics card. It's still a huge amount of money. I would love to see the return of high-end NVIDIA cards for, $500, $600, $700, $800. $1,000 for what is not even the flagship is still a lot of money, but it is representing a lot better value for money than we saw with the original RTX 4080. So that's it from me today. Hope you enjoyed the show. Let me know what you think of this graphics card in the comments as well. Are you considering the 4080 Super or the 4080 or 4070 Ti Super? Maybe you just want that 16GB upgrade for a bit of future proofing perhaps. Always love hearing what you guys think in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like this video, and I will be back very soon with some awesome builds with this and the other RTX 40 series CPUs with some funky small form factor mini ITX stuff going on as well. So don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I will see you soon.